The moment I knew my daughter was about to lose something far more important than a wedding venue, she was not looking at me. She was looking down at her folded linen napkin while another woman quietly dismantled 25 years of my life. "We knew you were a single father," Evelyn Langston said with a pleasant smile as she lifted her wine glass. "Now we understand why." The words were not loud. They did not have to be. The table fell into one of those strange silences where nobody breathes quite normally anymore. Even the waiter approaching with another basket of bread slowed his steps before turning away. I looked across the white tablecloth at my daughter. Tiana folded the corner of her napkin once, then twice. Finally, she whispered without raising her eyes, "Please, Dad, don't make this awkward." Not "that's enough." Not "do not talk to my father like that." Just "please do not make this awkward." Funny how one sentence can weigh more than 25 years. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I glanced around the private dining room at Aurelia, one of those upscale restaurants in downtown Columbus where every plate looks like a piece of artwork and everyone speaks half a volume quieter than normal. Bryce Langston sat beside Tiana in a navy suit that probably cost more than every suit I own put together. He rested one arm casually across the back of her chair, wearing the confident smile of a man who had never worried about a bill arriving before payday. Across from him sat his parents. Howard Langston held his wine glass by the stem and studied me the same way I used to inspect bridge supports during my engineering days, looking for cracks. Evelyn smiled with perfect posture and perfectly chosen words, not insults, observations, the kind that leave no fingerprints. Dinner had started politely enough. They had asked where I lived, how long I had been retired, what kind of truck I drove. When I answered honestly, a 15-year-old F-150, Evelyn smiled and said, "Oh, just that? Oh," as though one small syllable explained everything she believed about me. Then Howard leaned forward. "So Calvin, engineering for the state, correct?" "That's right, civil engineering, mostly bridge rehabilitation, some historical preservation work." He nodded politely. "And retirement has been comfortable?" Tiana answered before I could. "Dad never really cared about money." She meant it as a compliment. Evelyn did not hear it that way. "I'm sure that teaches valuable lessons," she said. "Bryce's family has always believed financial ambition is important." Bryce chuckled softly. "My mother likes measurable success." I smiled. "I always figured raising my daughter was measurable enough." Tiana gave me a quick smile, one that disappeared almost as quickly as it came. The conversation drifted toward wedding plans, flowers, guest lists, musicians, the historic estate they had chosen outside Columbus, Magnolia House. Bryce described it proudly. "It took months to secure," Evelyn added. "Only certain families even know it is available." I nodded. "It's a beautiful property." She looked surprised. "You've been there?" "A few times." I did not realize. There are a lot of old buildings in Franklin County. That was true. It just was not the whole truth. My briefcase rested beside my chair. Inside it sat the final approval packet for Magnolia House. One signature remained. Mine. Not because I owned the place, because every major private event held their required final authorization from the Preservation Trust responsible for protecting the property. The board reviewed applications. The chairman signed the approval. For the past 6 years, I had been that chairman. Volunteer work, no salary, no title on business cards because I did not have business cards anymore. Just something I believed mattered. Historic buildings disappear fast when nobody fights for them. Tiana knew I volunteered. She never asked exactly what I did. I never thought it mattered. Evelyn continued speaking. "I suppose Tiana had to become independent very young." I looked at her. "What makes you think that?" "Single-parent homes usually require children to mature faster." Her smile never moved. "I've read quite a bit about it." Bryce took another sip of wine. "Dad says adversity builds character." Howard nodded once. "It often does." Evelyn reached over and lightly touched Tiana's hand. "We were worried at first." Tiana looked confused. "Worried about what?" "About blending two very different families." Then Evelyn looked directly at me. "We knew you were a single father." She paused just long enough. "Now we understand why." Nobody moved. Bryce did not object. Howard studied his wine. Tiana stared at her lap. I waited. Not for Evelyn, for Tiana. All she had to say was one sentence. One. Instead, she whispered, "Please, Dad, don't make this awkward." I looked at her for several long seconds. In that moment, I was not seeing a 30-year-old woman wearing an engagement ring. I was seeing the little girl who used to run toward me after soccer practice with grass stains on both knees. The 6-year-old who insisted I twist her hair before school because I was finally getting better at it. The teenager who once hugged me so hard after Father's Day breakfast that she spilled orange juice all over my shirt. That little girl would never have stayed quiet. Somewhere along the way, life had taught her silence was easier. My knee reminded me it had been raining all afternoon. The old injury always complained before storms. I pushed my chair back carefully. The wood floor creaked beneath my weight. Tiana looked up. "Dad." I picked up my jacket, then my worn leather briefcase. Bryce frowned. "We're still discussing the venue details." "I know." Evelyn tilted her head. "Are you leaving?" "I think it's best." Tiana stood halfway. "Dad, please." I smiled at her, a tired smile. "You enjoy your dinner." She looked relieved. That hurt more than Evelyn's words. Howard finally spoke. "I'm sure we can all move forward like adults." "I hope so." Bryce gestured toward my briefcase. "The approval packet is in there, isn't it?" I met his eyes. "It is." "Then maybe we can finish everything Monday." "Maybe." Evelyn laughed lightly. "I knew you would be reasonable." I did not answer. I simply walked toward the restaurant entrance. The hostess opened the front door. Cool Ohio evening air met my face. Behind me, I heard dishes clinking and conversation slowly restarting. None of them knew the papers inside my briefcase carried one signature line they had never bothered to read. And none of them realized they had just watched the man whose name was already printed there walk out before they ever saw it. I did not sleep much that night. The house was quiet in the way only an old house can be. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped against the kitchen window. Every so often, the floorboards settled with a soft pop, almost like someone walking down the hallway. For years, those sounds had comforted me. That night, they only reminded me I was alone. I hung my suit jacket over the back of a chair and placed my leather briefcase on the kitchen table. It had been with me through bridge inspections, county meetings, retirement ceremonies, and more volunteer board meetings than I could count. I rested my hand on it for a moment, but I did not open it. Instead, I reached into the medicine cabinet for my arthritis pills. My right knee had stiffened after climbing the restaurant steps. 62 is not ancient, but the body has a way of keeping score. I swallowed the pills with a glass of water and stood quietly in the kitchen, looking toward the family room. There on the fireplace mantel sat dozens of photographs. Tiana at 6, missing her front teeth. Tiana in a blue soccer uniform holding a muddy trophy almost bigger than she was. Tiana at her high school graduation. Tiana hugging me after Ohio State accepted her. There were not many pictures of me. Single parents usually end up behind the camera. I picked up one frame. She could not have been more than 6 years old. Her ponytail leaned sideways because I was still learning how to do her hair properly. The first few months after her mother left had been rough, not because I did not know how to cook or clean, but because I had no idea how to be both parents at once. I learned poorly at first. The first twist out I attempted looked like a tangled extension cord. Tiana laughed so hard she nearly fell off the bathroom stool. "It's okay, Daddy," she said between giggles. "We'll practice." So we practiced every morning. Eventually, the parts became straighter. The lunches became less embarrassing. The laundry stopped turning pink. Little victories. Nobody. She knew my voice. She also knew I was not someone who delayed paperwork. There were some unexpected developments. "I'm sorry to hear that." She paused again. "I should mention we've already completed structural review, insurance verification, fire occupancy, and vendor compliance. Everything looks fine except the final chairman approval. I'll review it carefully as always." After we hung up, I finally unclasped the briefcase. Inside sat a thick folder. Across the front, Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust, Magnolia House, private event authorization. Beneath it sat another folder containing inspection photographs from the property. Sometimes people assumed Magnolia House belonged to a wealthy family. It had not for years. The estate had nearly been demolished after major structural damage decades earlier. Back then, I was still working for the state as a civil engineer. I was one of several engineers asked to inspect the foundation. The old limestone walls had shifted. Roof supports were failing. Most officials recommended demolition. A handful of us argued it could be saved. It took years. Fundraising, volunteer labor, grant applications, county hearings that stretched late into the night. When restoration finally finished, the estate became the responsibility of the Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust. Years later, after I retired, they asked if I would join the board. Eventually, they asked me to chair it. Not because I was wealthy, because I had spent 20 years making sure the building still existed. None of that had ever seemed important enough to tell Tiana. When she asked how retirement was going, I usually answered, keeping busy. That was true, just incomplete. Around noon, another call came, this one from Tiana. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A minute later, a text appeared. Dad, can we please talk? I did not answer immediately. Before I could decide what to say, another message arrived. Bryce feels terrible about last night. I read it twice. Bryce felt terrible. He had not looked particularly uncomfortable while his mother insulted me. I slipped the phone into my pocket without replying. An hour later, it rang again. This time I answered. Tiana sounded exhausted. Hi. Hi, sweetheart. Several seconds passed. I wish you had not left. I wish I had a reason to stay. She inhaled quietly. Evelyn didn't mean... I stopped her gently. Do not explain someone else's words. I'm trying to keep everyone together. I know. Can you just sign the venue paperwork? There it was. Not Dad, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry. Just can you sign? I haven't finished reviewing it. It should only take a minute. It deserves longer than a minute. Her voice tightened. They've already booked vendors. I understand. I cannot keep telling everyone we're waiting. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I know. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I'll call you later. Okay. She hung up first. I set the phone down and stared out the kitchen window. Rain had stopped. A pair of robins hopped across the wet grass. Life continued. Mine just felt strangely paused. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Not Tiana. Bryce. The message contained one sentence. Let's not make this personal. Just sign the papers. I read it once, then again. Personal. I had spent decades separating personal feelings from professional responsibility. Engineers do not get to ignore safety because someone seems nice. Trustees do not skip procedures because someone feels impatient. Magnolia House was not mine. It belonged to history. Every approval followed the same process. Every applicant signed the same commitments. Every event required the same review. That was exactly why people trusted us. Still, his words lingered. Just sign the papers, as though my only purpose now was making their lives easier. I closed the folder and slid it back into my briefcase. Outside, the clouds finally broke apart, and a thin strip of evening sunlight reached across my backyard. For a brief moment, everything looked peaceful. But inside that briefcase sat more than paperwork. It held the one decision everyone suddenly expected me to make. For the first time since becoming chairman, I was not sure whether the hardest part would be protecting a historic building or protecting what little remained of my relationship with my daughter. Monday morning started the way most of my Mondays had since retirement. I unlocked the side entrance to the Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust office a little before 8. The building was not fancy, just an old brick courthouse annex that had been converted into offices years ago. The floors creaked. The coffee in the break room was never strong enough, and everyone knew everyone else's grandkids. That was one thing I loved about volunteering. Nobody cared what kind of car you drove. They cared whether you showed up. Morning, Mr. Mercer. Marisol Jenkins looked up from her desk with her usual warm smile. Morning, Marisol. She handed me a stack of folders. Board meeting starts in 45 minutes. I thanked her and walked into my office. Calling it an office sounded grander than it was. It held a wooden desk, 2 chairs, a bookshelf full of preservation manuals, and a framed photograph of Magnolia House after restoration had been completed. I stood in that picture with dozens of volunteers. Most had retired. A few had already passed away. Every time I looked at that picture, I remembered how close we had come to losing the place forever. I sat down and opened the Langston file again. Everything looked exactly as Marisol had described. Insurance certificates, vendor contracts, fire occupancy approval, parking logistics, noise restrictions, historic preservation agreement. There was only one issue. The signed code of event conduct was missing. It was not optional. Every private event at Magnolia House required it. The policy had been adopted 4 years earlier after a wedding guest damaged a restored staircase while taking photographs. The agreement was not complicated. Treat staff respectfully, protect the property, follow preservation guidelines, accept responsibility for any damage. Every couple signed it without exception. I set the folder aside just as the board meeting began. For nearly 2 hours, we discussed roof repairs on an 1890 church, grant applications for a historic schoolhouse, and a cracked foundation beneath an old train depot. Nobody mentioned Tiana's wedding. Nobody knew she was my daughter. That had always been intentional. When volunteer work becomes personal, people start questioning every decision you make. I never wanted anyone wondering whether I received special treatment or gave it. After lunch, Marisol knocked softly on my office door. "You have a visitor." I looked up. "Who?" "A lawyer." That surprised me. "Send him in." A man about Bryce's age walked inside carrying a leather portfolio. He smiled professionally. "Mr. Mercer." "Yes. My name is Grant Holloway. I represent Mr. Bryce Langston." I motioned toward the chair. He remained standing. "This will not take long." I already knew I was not going to enjoy the conversation. He removed a document from his portfolio. "My client is concerned that personal disagreements may be delaying approval of his wedding application." I folded my hands calmly. "The application is still under review. My client believes all requirements have already been satisfied." "They have not." He frowned. "Our understanding is different." I reached into the folder beside me and slid one sheet across the desk. "The Code of Event Conduct has not been signed." He glanced down. "That's administrative. It's mandatory. I'm sure an exception could be made." "There are no exceptions." His smile faded slightly. "Mr. Langston believes withholding approval because of a private family disagreement could expose the trust to legal action." I looked directly at him. "Mr. Holloway." "Yes?" "Do you know how many weddings I've approved in the last 6 years?" He hesitated. "No. Neither do I." He looked confused. "I stopped counting." I gently tapped the folder. "I do not remember people's last names after they're married. I remember whether they respected the process." He did not answer. "I am treating your client exactly the same way I have treated everyone else." Another silence. Finally, he collected the unsigned document. "I'll advise my client." "I appreciate that." He left without another word. The office felt strangely quiet afterward. Not because I was worried about being sued. I was not. The trust had attorneys far better than anything Bryce could send into my office. What unsettled me was something else. Bryce actually believed I was abusing my position. He could not imagine that an ordinary-looking retired engineer might simply be doing his job. That evening, my phone rang again. Tiana. This time I answered immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." She sounded exhausted. "Bryce told me a lawyer visited you." "He did." "Dad, why?" "He hired him." "You know what I mean." I leaned back in my chair. "The application is not complete. It's one missing signature." "It's an important one." She sighed heavily. "They think you're punishing us." "I'm following policy." "You could finish this today." "I could." "Then why won't you?" The question stayed in the air between us. Finally, I answered honestly. "Because once I stop applying the rules equally, they stop meaning anything." She was quiet. "I do not know how to fix this." "I know. I feel like everyone expects me to choose." "You should not have to." "But I am." Her voice cracked. "Bryce says if we lose Magnolia House, his parents will never forgive me." I closed my eyes. "And what about me?" Silence, long enough to hurt. She swallowed. "I do not know." Neither did I. After we hung up, I drove home through light evening traffic. Columbus looked beautiful after a summer rain. Children rode bicycles through quiet neighborhoods. People grilled hamburgers in backyards. Normal life. Mine no longer felt normal. Inside the house, I warmed leftover chicken soup. Retirement had taught me one useful lesson. Good soup always tastes better the second day. I carried the bowl into the family room and noticed something sticking out from beneath an old photo album on the coffee table. A handmade Father's Day card. The corners were worn from being opened too many times. I smiled before I even unfolded it. Purple construction paper. Crooked glitter glue. A 6-year-old's handwriting. "I'll always choose you, Daddy." Below it, she had drawn the two of us holding hands. Her stick figures had enormous smiles. I had kept every Father's Day card she ever made. Birthdays came and went. Christmas decorations got packed away. Those cards stayed. I sat there for a long time. The soup grew cold beside me. I thought about the little girl who used to wait by the front window every evening, watching for my old truck to turn onto our street. She would race outside before I even parked. "Daddy's home." Back then, she never wondered whether I was important enough. She only cared that I came home. I reached for the approval packet lying on the coffee table. The unsigned page waited near the end. One signature. One stroke of a pen. Everything could become easier. Tiana would stop crying. Bryce's family would stop calling. The wedding could move forward. I picked up my fountain pen, uncapped it, and placed the tip above the signature line. Then my eyes drifted back to the Father's Day card. "I'll always choose you, Daddy." My hand stopped. Not because I wanted revenge, not because Evelyn had insulted me, not even because Bryce had threatened legal action. I stopped because, for the first time in my life, I realized I was about to ignore my own principles simply to keep other people comfortable. The tears came quietly. I had not cried when my wife left. I had not cried when I retired. I had not cried at that restaurant. But sitting alone in my living room, holding a pen above a document that represented everything I had spent decades believing in, I finally did. Not because strangers had judged me, because the little girl who once promised she would always choose me had become a woman who did not know if she still could. I wiped my eyes, closed the folder, and returned the pen to my pocket. The papers would remain unsigned. At least for now. By Sunday afternoon, my house smelled like chicken noodle soup and fresh bread. Cooking had always helped me think. Back when Tiana was little, I made a pot of soup almost every Sunday. It was cheap, easy to reheat during the week, and somehow made the whole house feel warmer, even in the middle of an Ohio winter. Old habits stick around. I was slicing carrots when I heard tires crunch across the gravel driveway. A silver SUV pulled in. Tiana climbed out before the engine had completely stopped. She looked exhausted. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and the dark circles beneath her eyes told me she had been sleeping about as well as I had. I opened the front door before she reached it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around me, not tightly, more like someone afraid the other person might pull away. "I've missed you," she whispered. "I live 20 minutes away," I said gently. "I know." We stepped inside. She glanced around the house. Nothing had really changed. The same worn oak floors, the same blue curtains she picked out when she was 14, the same grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner. "You still have not replaced that couch," she said with a tired smile. "It still works." "You always say that." "And I am usually right." For the first time in days, she laughed. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then reality returned. "I do not want to fight anymore." "Neither do I." I ladled soup into 2 bowls and set them on the kitchen table. She stared down at the steam rising from the broth. "I have not had your soup in years." "You always liked extra crackers." She smiled faintly. "You remembered?" "I remember a lot of things." We ate quietly for several minutes. The silence was not uncomfortable. It reminded me of evenings after her soccer practices when she was too tired to talk until she had finished half her dinner. Finally, she set down her spoon. "Dad." "Mm-hmm. I'm asking one more time." I already knew what was coming. "Please sign the approval." I folded my napkin carefully. "Tiana." I know the paperwork is not technically finished. It is not. I know they should not have pushed you. They should not have. But if you sign it, all of this goes away. I looked at her for a long moment. She was not defending Evelyn anymore. She was not making excuses for Bryce. She just looked overwhelmed, like someone standing in the middle of a tug-of-war, convinced that letting go of either rope would destroy everything. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. She blinked. "What?" "Not Bryce. Not Evelyn. You. What do you want?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I want everyone to stop hating each other." "That is not the same question." She looked down at her hands. "I do not know anymore." That answer hurt because I believed it. She truly did not know. I stood and walked into the living room. My briefcase sat beside the recliner. I picked it up and carried it back to the kitchen. Tiana watched without saying a word. I opened the class, removed the approval packet, then laid it gently on the table between us. Her shoulders relaxed. "I knew you would understand." "I did not say that." I flipped through the pages one by one. Insurance, vendor agreements, historical preservation requirements, the unsigned code of event conduct. Finally, the chairman's signature page. I reached into my shirt pocket and removed my fountain pen. Tiana let out a slow breath. "Thank you." I uncapped the pen. My signature belonged beneath the printed words, Calvin Mercer, Chairman, Franklin County Historic Preservation Trust. The room was completely still. Then Tiana's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. "I should wash my hands first." She stood quickly. "I'll be right back." She carried her bowl toward the sink and disappeared down the hallway toward the bathroom. Her phone remained on the kitchen table. I never made a habit of reading other people's messages. Privacy mattered, especially between parents and adult children. I was not even looking at the screen. Then it lit up. The message preview appeared automatically, large enough that I could not help seeing it. "Evelyn. Once he signs, we won't have to deal with him after the wedding." I froze. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe there was context. Before I could even process the first message, another notification appeared. "Bryce, just keep him calm until we get the approval." The pen slipped from my fingers. It landed softly on the table. I stared at the glowing screen. Neither message mentioned me by name. They did not need to. I was the only he, the only approval, the only obstacle. 1,000 little moments from the past week suddenly lined up like pieces of a puzzle. Bryce insisting I just sign. The lawyer. The pressure. Evelyn pretending reconciliation mattered. It had never been about making peace. It had been about getting what they wanted first, then deciding later whether I still belonged. I slowly looked toward the hallway. I could hear the bathroom faucet running. Tiana had no idea I had seen the messages. Or did she? The thought crossed my mind for only a second before I pushed it away. No. If she had known, she would not have left her phone behind. At least I hope she would not. She returned carrying a towel. The moment she saw my expression, her smile disappeared. "Dad." I gently turned the phone so she could see the screen. Her face drained of color. She did not touch it. For several long seconds, she simply stared. Her voice barely existed. "I did not know she sent that." "I believe you." She looked at me with tears already forming. "I swear." "I know. But Bryce." She grabbed the phone and opened the conversation. Her thumb scrolled upward rapidly. Her breathing became uneven. "Oh my God!" She was not acting. I knew my daughter well enough to tell the difference. The further she scrolled, the more devastated she looked. "There are more," she whispered. I did not ask to see them. I did not need to. She lowered herself into the chair as though her legs had given out. "They have been talking like this." She could not finish. I sat back down across from her. The approval packet still rested between us, untouched. "I'm so sorry." "I know." "I did not know." "I know." She buried her face in her hands. "They kept saying they were trying to fix things." I waited. "They told me you were just being stubborn." "I know." "They said if I stayed calm, everything would work out." Tears slipped through her fingers. For the first time since that dinner, I was not looking at my little girl. I was looking at a woman discovering that the people she trusted had quietly been deciding the future of her family without ever telling her. After several minutes, she looked up. So, her voice trembled. Will you sign now? The question surprised me, not because she asked, because part of her still hoped everything could somehow be saved. I closed the folder carefully, quietly. I cannot sign this today. She stared at me in disbelief. Dad, if I sign now, neither of us will know whether they're apologizing because they mean it. I rested my hand gently on the folder, or because they need something. She stood so quickly her chair scraped across the floor. You think I'm just like them? No. Then why are you doing this? I'm trying to protect both of us. She shook her head, tears falling freely now. No, you've already made up your mind. I have not. You have. She grabbed her purse. I came here because I thought you still believed in me. I do. Then prove it. I am. She looked at me for one long, heartbreaking moment. Then she whispered the words I would remember for a very long time. Maybe they were right about you. The front door closed harder than she intended. Her SUV backed down the driveway. Then she was gone. I stood alone in the kitchen. The soup had gone cold. The approval packet remained unsigned. And for the first time, I realized the hardest part was not standing against Bryce's family. It was accepting that doing the right thing sometimes looks exactly like doing the cruel thing to the person you love most. The week that followed felt strangely quiet, not because people had stopped talking, because they had stopped talking to me. Tiana did not call. Bryce did not send another text. Even Evelyn, who had seemed determined to insert herself into every conversation, disappeared. Life, however, kept moving. Tuesday morning, I attended a board meeting about repairing the slate roof on a 19th century church. Wednesday afternoon, I helped inspect water damage at an old schoolhouse outside Columbus. Thursday, I spent an hour in my backyard pulling weeds that would probably return before the weekend. Routine has a way of keeping grief from swallowing you whole. Then Friday morning, Marisol knocked on my office door. You should probably see this. She handed me a printed email. The sender was Evelyn Langston. Not to me, to Magnolia House's event coordinator. The subject line read, cancellation confirmation. I frowned. I never approved a cancellation. Marisol nodded. Neither did we. The email explained that the Langston family had decided to move the wedding to an exclusive country club outside Dublin because, in Evelyn's words, the trust has become unnecessarily difficult to work with. I read the message twice. So they canceled it themselves 3 days ago and never told us. Correct. They've already requested part of the deposit back? Marisol sighed. They have. I closed the email. They're entitled to whatever the contract allows. Marisol studied me carefully. You doing okay? I smiled. I've been through worse than paperwork. She smiled back. I figured. Before leaving, she hesitated. One more thing. She handed me another envelope. The board wanted this added to the file. Inside was a formal letter prepared by the Trust's legal counsel. It summarized the timeline. Application received. Technical reviews completed. Missing code of event conduct. Attorney threat received. No final denial ever issued. Applicant voluntarily withdrew before approval process concluded. Everything documented. Everything factual. Everything professional. I slipped the letter into the Langston file. Something told me it was not finished telling its story. Saturday evening arrived warm and clear. The rehearsal dinner was being held at the country club Evelyn had chosen after canceling Magnolia House. I was not invited. That did not surprise me. What did surprise me was the phone call I received a little after 6. Mr. Mercer. It was Marisol. I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday. What's wrong? There was a request from Miss Mercer this afternoon. My heart skipped. What kind of request? She asked for the complete approval file. I stood. Did you give it to her? Yes, it belongs to her now. Marisol lowered her voice. I also included the legal timeline prepared yesterday. I closed my eyes. Thank you. I thought she deserved facts instead of rumors. So did I. We hung up. For the next hour, I paced through my living room. I tried reading and could not focus. I turned on the television and muted it after 5 minutes. Finally, I sat on my back porch watching lightning bugs drift over the lawn. Whatever happened that night, I could not control it anymore. Tiana later told me exactly what happened. She remembered every word. When she arrived at the country club, everyone acted as though nothing unusual had happened. Round tables, white roses, champagne glasses, soft piano music. Evelyn greeted guests with effortless grace. "There she is," Evelyn smiled. "Our beautiful bride." Tiana forced a smile. Inside her purse rested the file from the trust. She had not opened it yet. Dinner began. People laughed. Someone joked about honeymoon destinations. Bryce seemed unusually relaxed, almost relieved. Then he stood to give a toast. He tapped his glass. "I just want to thank everyone who supported us through a few unexpected complications." Several guests chuckled politely. He smiled toward Tiana. "Families are not always easy." A few people nodded knowingly. But eventually, everyone has to decide whether they're building a future. His eyes briefly scanned the room, or staying trapped in the past. Polite applause followed. Tiana reached into her purse. She pulled out the envelope and quietly opened it. The first page was the official timeline. Application received. Complete pending final chairman approval. Missing required conduct agreement. No denial issued. Second page. Copy of Bryce's attorney's letter threatening legal action against the trust. Third page. Evelyn's cancellation request. Timestamped. Submitted 48 hours before any final decision existed. Fourth page. The chairman's signature page. Blank. Below it, Chairman Calvin Mercer. Tiana stared at the name, then continued reading. The final page contained a letter from the trust's attorney. It stated clearly, the application remained under routine review until voluntarily withdrawn by the applicants. At no time did Chairman Calvin Mercer reject or delay approval outside established preservation policy. She looked up slowly. Bryce was sitting back down, still smiling. Evelyn noticed the paperwork first. "What are you reading, dear?" Tiana did not answer. Instead, she placed the first page in front of Bryce. He frowned. "What is this?" "The truth." His smile disappeared. Evelyn leaned closer. Bryce flipped through the pages faster and faster. His face tightened. "Where did you get these?" "From the trust." Howard quietly adjusted his glasses. Bryce looked toward his parents. "They're twisting this." Tiana spoke calmly. "No." She turned another page toward Evelyn. "You canceled Magnolia House." Evelyn blinked. "Well, of course we had to." "No." Tiana shook her head. "You canceled before Dad even finished the review." Nobody at the nearby tables was talking anymore. Bryce lowered his voice. "This is not the place." Tiana ignored him. "You told everyone my father refused to cooperate." Evelyn attempted a gentle smile. "Sweetheart, the important thing is moving forward." Tiana slid the attorney's timeline across the table. "No, the important thing is telling the truth." Howard picked up the document. He read silently. His expression changed. He looked at Bryce. "You threatened the trust?" Bryce exhaled sharply. "It was negotiation. You sent a legal threat over routine paperwork." Bryce did not answer. Tiana reached the final page. The chairman's signature sheet. She laid it flat on the table where everyone could see. "My father was not some clerk delaying our wedding." She looked directly at Bryce. "He was the chairman responsible for protecting that property." The room had become completely silent. Bryce rubbed both hands across his face. "Tiana, no." He reached toward her. She pulled the papers away. "I asked you over and over if my father had done something wrong." Bryce swallowed. "I was trying to protect us." "By lying." Evelyn finally lost her composure. "We were protecting our family's reputation." Tiana stared at her. "By destroying mine?" Nobody answered. Then Bryce said the one thing he should never have said. "Without my family," he said frustrated, "you would still be nobody." The sentence echoed across the room. Even the waiter standing near the doorway stopped moving. Tiana looked at him quietly, not angrily, sadly. She slipped her engagement ring off her finger. Bryce's eyes widened. "Tiana." She placed the ring gently beside his wineglass. "I'd rather be nobody," she said, her voice calm, "with my father." No one spoke. Not Evelyn, not Howard, not the guests who suddenly found their dinner plates fascinating. Tiana picked up the envelope, walked out of the ballroom, and never looked back. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. I answered before the first ring finished. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, I'm here." I closed my eyes. "I chose too late." "No," I said. "You chose now." She began crying. "I'll come tomorrow. I'll be home." After we hung up, I remained on the back porch. The summer night was quiet. Crickets chirped somewhere beyond the fence. I was not happy. There was no victory in hearing your daughter's heartbreak. But for the first time since that dinner at Aurelia, she had found her own voice, and she had used it to tell the truth. It rained the morning after the rehearsal dinner. Not a heavy summer storm, just one of those steady Ohio rains that seemed to wash the noise out of the world. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when I noticed my old Ford through the front window. Raindrops slid down the windshield in crooked lines, and beyond it, someone stood at the end of the driveway. Tiana. She was not holding an umbrella. She simply stood there, soaked to the shoulders, as if she was not sure she had earned the right to come any closer. I opened the front door before she could knock. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I smiled. "Come in, honey." Her lips trembled. "The soup's getting cold." That was all I said. Not "I told you so." Not "you should have listened." Just "come in." She stepped inside and quietly took off her wet shoes by the door, just like she had done since elementary school. The house looked exactly as it always had. Same frame family photos, same quilt folded over the couch, same clock ticking steadily in the hallway. She looked around as if seeing everything for the first time. "I almost forgot how this place smells. Chicken noodle soup and coffee? And cinnamon." I smiled. "That's because I made toast." For the first time in days, a tiny smile crossed her face. It disappeared almost immediately. "I ruined everything." I shook my head. "No, I did. You trusted the wrong people. I trusted them instead of you." That was harder to answer. I motioned toward the kitchen table. "Sit." She lowered herself into the same chair she had occupied a week earlier. This time there were no approval packets between us, only 2 bowls of soup. For several minutes we ate quietly. Finally, she placed her spoon down. "I ended it. I know. I left the ring there. I know. I do not even remember driving home." Her voice cracked. "I kept hearing what he said." I waited. "Without my family, you'd still be nobody." She stared into her bowl. Then I realized. She wiped away a tear. "The only person who never made me feel like nobody was sitting here." Neither of us spoke for a while. Sometimes silence says exactly what words cannot. She reached into her purse. "I brought something." She placed a small brass key on the table. I recognized it instantly. When Tiana turned 18 and left for college, I handed her that spare house key. "You never have to ask permission to come home," I had told her. She slid it toward me. "I do not deserve this anymore." I looked at the key, then at her. I gently pushed it back across the table. She frowned. "Dad, it was never the house I trusted you with." She looked up. It was my heart. The tears she had been holding back finally came. She covered her face with both hands. "I'm so sorry. I know you are. I should have stopped Evelyn that first night. Yes, I should have stood up when she insulted you. Yes, I kept thinking if I stayed quiet, everyone would calm down." I nodded slowly. "Silence feels safe in the moment." She looked at me. "But later it costs more than we expect." She cried for several more minutes. I simply sat there. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is stay long enough for the tears to finish. The weeks that followed were quieter. Bryce called several times. Tiana never answered. Evelyn mailed a letter asking for an opportunity to clear up misunderstandings. Tiana did not open it. She dropped it into the recycling bin. Life settled into something slower, healthier. On Thursday afternoons, Tiana started stopping by after work. Sometimes she helped me weed the garden. Sometimes we watched old baseball games. Sometimes we just sat on the back porch without saying much at all. Little by little, we stopped talking about what happened. Not because we forgot, because we did not need to relive it every visit. One afternoon, she asked something that caught me off guard. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you were chairman?" I smiled. Would it have changed anything? She thought about it. Maybe. Then I'm glad I did not. She looked puzzled. I never wanted your respect to depend on a title. She reached across the porch and squeezed my hand. It does not anymore. A few months later, Marisol invited me to Magnolia House for the dedication of a newly restored garden wall. After the ceremony, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the younger trustees. Thank you for reminding all of us that preserving history is not only about old buildings. Sometimes it is about preserving integrity when it is inconvenient. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my wallet. It meant more than they probably realized. Nearly 2 years passed. Time did not erase everything. It rarely does. But it softened the sharp edges. Tiana eventually met someone new. His name was Malcolm Price. He taught high school history on the west side of Columbus. The first time he came over for dinner, he spent 20 minutes asking me about restoring old bridges because he genuinely wanted to learn. When he accidentally tracked mud onto my kitchen floor, he apologized 3 separate times and insisted on cleaning it himself. No performance, no superiority, just kindness. One evening, he asked if we could talk privately. We sat on the back porch while Tiana helped bring dessert outside. He looked nervous. I'd like to ask your permission to marry your daughter. I laughed softly. You do not need my permission. I know, he smiled, but I'd still like your blessing. That felt different. I gave it gladly. Their wedding took place in my backyard on a warm September evening. No country club, no crystal chandeliers, no carefully rehearsed speeches designed to impress strangers. Our neighbors brought folding chairs. Friends strung warm white lights between the maple trees. Someone played acoustic guitar while children chased one another across the lawn. I wore a new suit this time. It fit a little better than the old one. My sister still complained about the tie, but that is what sisters are for. Tiana slipped her arm through mine. You okay? I'll survive, she smiled. You've always done that. When we reached the front, she stopped me for just a second. I chose the right arm this time. I looked at her. She squeezed my hand. I'm walking in with the person who never stopped choosing me. I could not answer. My throat would not let me, so I simply kissed her forehead and placed her hand into Malcolm's. That was enough. Looking back now, people sometimes ask whether I regret not signing those papers the day everyone wanted me to. I do not. Not because the wedding was canceled, not because Bryce faced the consequences of his own choices, but because I finally understood something I had spent years trying to teach my daughter without ever saying it out loud. Respect is rarely destroyed by one cruel sentence. More often, it is lost in the silence that follows it. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop keeping peace for people who were never trying to protect yours.